we can share it around for our colleagues who are not able to join today. Um, and now it started. So today, thanks for joining Marshall Mondays. We have the University of Sheffield, and we're going to have a talk from senior lecturer Matthew Bishop, lecturer in international politics, I believe. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Matthew. And then we're going to hand over to Kate, who's going to give you a background on the University of Sheffield, the history, and a bit more detail on that area. And then we'll also be joined, I think, in a bit by a student who will be able to answer any questions you have about student life and student experience. So with that said, Matthew, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Hayley, and good evening or afternoon, everybody. So my name is Matt Bishop. I'm an academic in the department, senior lecturer, as Hayley said, in international politics. That's equivalent to associate professor, I guess, if we're using the American terminology. What I thought I'd do is just give you a kind of short 20-minute sense of how we teach in this department. And we have a very, very kind of open-minded approach to the study of politics. So across our department, we have people working in all the major subfields. We have people engaging in all manner of different kinds of research. So we're very pluralistic methodologically. So we have people doing very, very kind of low-level ethnographic, deep research in different places. And then we have other people doing kind of big quantitative data type studies. And we have regional expertise on probably just about every place in the world you can possibly think of. I myself am an expert really in Caribbean politics. That was where I spent the early part of my career in the West Indies. And we teach by asking really, really big questions. So the one I thought I would deal with today is whether or not we're witnessing the end of globalization. This is something that we see raising its head quite frequently in the media, but also in academic debates about the current juncture at which the global economy finds itself. Can we go on to the next slide, please, Kate? So we find ourselves in quite strange times. Before he became president of the United States, Donald Trump said, and he made many pronouncements like this, that our politicians have aggressively pursued a policy of globalization, moving our jobs, our wealth, and our factories to Mexico and overseas. Globalization has made the financial elite who donate to politicians very, very wealthy. I used to be one of them, he said. I hate to say it, but I used to be one of them. He's not profiting from that kind of activity anymore. This is really interesting because in the run-up to the arrival of Trump on the scene and a number of other politicians, leading politicians around the same time, there was kind of this conventional wisdom that globalization, broadly speaking, was a good thing, that the kind of liberal certainty that accompanied the end of the 1990s and the so-called end of history, as Francis Fukuyama called it, meant that there was really one way of managing the global economy, and that was an economy that was very open in trade terms, that allowed capital and investment and people and goods and services to move to wherever they wanted to in the world, and they could be most efficiently produced. And something that's really interesting about Trump's arrival on the scene is that this was a politician ostensibly of the right, so not a politician of the left, but a politician of the right who came to power espousing kind of skepticism about open global free markets. And in particular, the thing that's really interesting about this is that he himself was somebody who was a billionaire, a member of the commercial class who had profited very greatly from globalization. Next slide, please, Kate. At the same time, Xi Jinping was beginning to cement his power in China, and we have this really interesting role reversal. So Xi is a self-declared Marxist, as all of the Chinese elite are, and he had this to say, which contrasts quite starkly with Trump's pronouncement. He says, just blaming economic globalization for the world's problems is inconsistent with reality, and it will not help solve the problems. It is true that globalization has created new problems, but this is no justification to write it off completely. Rather, we should adapt to and guide economic globalization, cushion its negative impact, and deliver its benefits to all countries and all nations. So this is really interesting. This is a kind of a restatement of the benefits of globalization in a way that many skeptical voices were not prepared to hear at this moment in time. And the reason we get to this point where we start to see this contestation over the benefits or not of global openness relates to the fact that the long period after the global financial crisis of 2010 witnessed continued stagnation in much of the West, particularly so in parts of Europe, but to a significant extent in the US and North America and Latin America as well. And this contrasted quite starkly with the experience of China. China was still growing very strongly throughout the global financial crisis and beyond it. The Chinese economy has doubled in size pretty much over the last decade or so. And China has been one of the key beneficiaries of globalization, whilst at the same time retaining a quite heavy degree of state control over their domestic economy. Next slide, please, Kate. And then when Biden comes to power in the US a couple of years ago, we suddenly see a kind of metamorphosis of thinking, where a lot of the ideas that were originally espoused by Trump and for which he received an awful lot of criticism from kind of liberal economists and political economists, Biden kind of had this strong restatement of the need for domestic kind of political intervention and economic intervention, where he said, we're making sure, and this was in his State of the Union address last year, we're making sure the supply chain for America begins in America. And on my watch, American roads, American bridges, and American highways will be made with American products. Now, on one level, this is really not that different to something that Donald Trump would have said, which shows how far we've come in the period since, let's say, Bill Clinton, maybe George Bush Jr. But the really, really intriguing thing was that we see this gradual coalescing of a new consensus now around the need for much, much greater domestic intervention in the economy, a substantial degree of kind of soft protectionism towards the outside world, which I think raises that really interesting question that I posed at the beginning. Does this mean that we're witnessing the end of globalization or not? Next slide, please, Kate. So what is globalization? Well, the kind of famous definition of the term emerged out of this book, Global Transformations, that was published about 25 years ago nearly. Interestingly, Jonathan Perrotin, one of the authors, was an academic at Sheffield, and he sadly passed away a couple of weeks ago. This was an immensely influential book in the field of political economy. And in it, the authors essentially argued that globalization is really nothing more than the widening, deepening, and speeding up of worldwide interconnectedness in all aspects of contemporary social life, from the cultural to the criminal, the financial to the spiritual. Essentially, what they were arguing is that globalization was a process. It's not really something that has a kind of an ability to drive things on its own, which is the way it's often described in much of the literature, particularly the journalistic kind of literature. It's simply a process. It's a reflection of the fact that we as humans desire greater openness. We desire trading with people across borders. We desire all manner of kind of personal interconnections and professional and commercial interconnections that take place across borders. Next slide, Kate. And they're coming out of this, there are three kind of ways of thinking about it. So one way of thinking about it pertains to this kind of question of how far it's gone. This is the piece on the left as you look at the screen. So when the globalization debate first emerged in the 1990s, essentially there was this hyper-globalist account of globalization. This is the Francis Fukuyama type account that essentially said that states were now redundant. We're going to see this just proliferation of commercial activity across borders, and actually, you know, this is it. This is the end of history. There was a backlash against this from what these authors termed a skeptical account, where essentially they argued that actually what we're seeing is not that different to anything in the recent past. People have always traded across borders. The only difference now is that things are moving at a slightly faster pace than they once did. The authors of the book Global Transformations took a position between these two, a kind of synthesis position, and they described themselves as transformationalists. Essentially what they said is that globalization is new, it is real, it is happening at quite a staggering pace, but it also doesn't mean that it's beyond the control of states or public authority, and it also is open-ended in its nature. It doesn't presuppose the end of the nation state or anything like that. The second way of thinking about globalization is as a concept, as a contested concept. So what does globalization actually mean? And this depends really on who you are, where you stand, and what your ideological preferences are. So a Marxist account of globalization would look quite different to a liberal account, both in terms of how they define the concept and how desirable they see particular kinds of global interconnectedness and patterns of control of that process, who gets to decide how it functions. And then there are a whole set of other debates that emerged out of questions of globalization. One was the so-called anti or alter globalization debate, where there was a huge backlash against this process as reflected in demonstrations at major summits. The so-called battle in Seattle is probably the most famous. There's another debate that looks at globalization as waves. So the argument essentially is that globalization has emerged in a series of waves. And as the wave kind of goes a bit too far, there is this sort of mild resistance to it, and maybe a backlash. So the first wave was after 1945, where we see the expansion of the global economy after the Second World War. The second wave was sort of the after the crisis of the 1970s into the 1980s. And then the third wave was the period we associate sometimes with this process of hyperglobalization. So the rapid expansion of cross-border capital flows and transport, especially after the kind of early 1990s. So this period that Francis Fukuyama again was writing about, when we saw leaders like Bill Clinton and Tony Blair and others in power. And a longer standing question that emerges out of this, which relates to the bigger question that we're dealing with in this discussion, is whether or not a fourth wave will ultimately emerge. So the position we find ourselves in now, a decade or so after the global financial crisis, emerging out of a second kind of once in a lifetime crisis or once in a generation crisis with the pandemic, where the global economy is struggling as a whole. Political authority is exceptionally fragmented, and that has been exacerbated, I think, by the war in Ukraine. And there isn't really a consensus in the way that there was in the 1990s about how we should order this. And part of the reason for that, of course, is that the West is no longer united in the way that it once was. So we have this really, really perhaps strange but interesting phenomenon where the kinds of things that Western leaders have criticized, for example, the Chinese state for behaving in particular ways in terms of intervention in their economies, in terms of kind of distorting market processes and market signals over the last 20 or 30 years, they are increasingly the kinds of policies that Western actors are advocating themselves. So there's a serious question here about where the consensus is that we require in order to have a kind of stable, unified approach to governing the global economy. Next slide, please, Kate. And that then opens up a whole series of other really interesting questions about globalization. So Danny Roderick here, who is an exceptionally famous economist who's written lots of really good books on globalization, and a number of other authors whose books you can see there, has basically suggested that we need a better balance between national autonomy and globalization. So the problem is that globalization did go too far after the 1990s. It did undermine, to some extent, domestic political autonomy. And he says that in particular, we need to place the requirements of liberal democracy ahead of those of international trade and investment. Such a rebalancing would leave plenty of room for an open global economy. In fact, it would enable and sustain it, so that we need to have more political authority, domestic political authority. Next slide, please, Kate. The danger, though, is that you can push this too far, and there's a danger really of throwing the globalization baby, or kind of out with the bathwater, if you like. And in some of the work that I've done on globalization, we've identified a kind of process that is sometimes called deglobalization. So arguments from different parts of the political spectrum which emphasize and argue for retreating from an open global economy in one way or another. So to take Donald Trump again, he's an example of what might be called a kind of regressive nationalism or deglobalization from the right. So Trump argued again, and this sounds very similar to some of the things Biden has said. From this moment on, it's going to be America first. Every decision on trade, on taxes, on immigration, on foreign affairs will be made to benefit American workers and American families. We must protect our borders from the ravages of other countries making our products, stealing our companies and destroying our jobs. We will follow two simple rules: buy American and hire American. Now, you can all be judges about the extent to which he was successful in implementing this kind of policy. The interesting thing is that these kinds of arguments were repeated by political actors on the right the world over and they still are, of course. I mean, think of the kind of right-wing Brexiteers in the UK as another example. And essentially, what this kind of deglobalization from the right advocates is not really a kind of deglobalization. Actually, it's a kind of hyper globalization, but one that is untethered from the kind of wider institutional structures that allow for some kind of multilateral management of that international system. So the kind of the aggressive sort of America first posturing, similarly again to the Brexiteer kind of aggressive pursuit of national sovereignty and kind of detaching the United Kingdom from frameworks of collaboration, the framework of collaboration that's encompassed in the EU, is a kind of example of this sort of regressive attempt to reassert national power. And of course, it's mixed. It's met with fairly mixed success in terms of its impact on investment and other kinds of benefits and so on. Next slide, please, Kate. But this is also matched by a kind of left-wing deglobalization. And in some of our work, we call this a progressive nationalism. This isn't to say that this isn't making a value judgment that it is more progressive than Trumpism. Plenty of people identify Trump with a kind of progressive sort of set of agendas. It's simply that this is how those actors kind of describe themselves. And the Lexiteer account, so this is kind of a left-wing Brexit account, is a really good example of this, as is some of the other kind of hard left political movements in Europe. So Jean-Luc Mélenchon's La France Insoumise is another example in the French context. And essentially, the Lexiteers in the UK have pushed for a whole range of what they consider to be kind of forbidden policies that haven't been allowed under the era of neoliberal globalization that has kind of held sway over the last 20 or 30 years. They argue that things like state aid, industrial strategy, targeted investment, managed trade and capital flows, procurement linkages, etc., all of these instruments are the kinds of things that are necessary to engage in structural change in the economy, and they've never been able to be implemented because the European Union stood in the way of Britain engaging in those kinds of policies. So by leaving the European Union, we're able to kind of reject the orthodoxy of liberal free market economics. Next slide, please, Kate. The problem with all of this, though, is that it's a misreading, really, of the reality of globalization. Because if globalization is just a process, if it's just something that occurs and is a kind of the sum total of different human interactions operating at different levels in different institutions, actually, you can't really make a retreat from globalization. So a few points that we make in our book on the subject are as follows. The first one is that the thing that a lot of people are railing against when they're unhappy with globalization is not globalization in general. Donald Trump still likes to fly around the world. He still likes to engage in cross-border commercial transactions of all kind. He's got plenty of friends and acquaintances all over the planet. He is a globalizer. He's a symptom of globalization, an example of globalization. But what they're really railing against is the type of globalization that we had during the neoliberal period. So for some on the right, the problem with neoliberal globalization is that it was embedded within kind of multilateral governing systems that did constrain the state in lots of ways, and often for very, very good reasons. There are good reasons why the state isn't able to just engage in social dumping, and it isn't able to engage in all manner of other kind of nefarious things that states would like to get up to if they can. At the same time, those on the left are also unhappy with neoliberal globalization because they perceive that it meant that kind of market transactions went too far at particular moments in time. It privileged the market over other goods such as social welfare and the interests of labour. The second point that's worth making following this is that deglobalization is not really a solution to our problems. I think it's very, very difficult to argue that leaving the European Union has made Britain better off The evidence is pretty clear that it hasn't. And arguably, it hasn't even achieved the sovereignty gains that its proponents often suggest it has. All of the policies that the Lexiteers advocate were possible up to a point within the European Union, and the ones that were prevented were also prevented for very, very good reason. But at the same time, ironically, in this kind of reassertion of national sovereignty, Britain actually has far less autonomy because it still has to negotiate with a hugely powerful entity on its doorstep, but it does so outside from a position of weakness. Now, the interesting case then comes with the US example and thinking about Biden. And the question then comes with whether or not Biden is kind of espousing the same sorts of policies as Trump. And I would suggest that he probably isn't. That although a lot of the rhetoric is quite similar and there are overlaps in it, the kind of policy agenda that Biden has advocated in terms of huge infrastructural investments, huge subsidies for kind of investments in green technology and all of those kinds of things, is a much more progressive agenda than the kind of, sort of kind of just blind America first sort of agenda that Trump was espousing. But the interesting thing is that the consequence of a country the size of the United States engaging in that kind of policy is that it creates huge dilemmas for every other country in the world. And it's easy for China and the European Union to respond to that with similar kinds of hugely well-resourced policies of their own. But countries like Britain, outside of the EU, suddenly find themselves in quite a difficult position in terms of working out how to respond, in terms of developing their own kinds of green industries and so on that can possibly compete. So the second point here really is that deglobalization is no solution to our problems, as this new political economy hovers into view, where there is a degree of reshoring taking place, where supply chains are moving back to the US and China and the EU. Those supply chains still occur on this kind of hugely continental level and require governance. They need to be governed by kind of political authority, democratic political authority. But there is a serious point, which is that states do require more policy space alongside greater openness. So the kind of yearnings from disaffected groups that led to the election of Donald Trump and led to Brexit in the UK have not gone away and aren't going to go away, because there are large numbers of people that are excluded from the benefits of globalization. So we need a new kind of social bargain going forward, but it needs to be one that cannot just occur at the national level. It has to occur internationally. We need to recast our international institutions in ways that can embed a better social bargain, so that the global economy works to the benefit of a greater number of people. And this in turn involves reforming the institutions of global governance that we have. Next slide, Kane. And that's it. I'm done. That was a very, very quick whistle stop tour of thinking about globalization, which if you were a student in our department, that lecture would have probably taken about 3 weeks to do. It would have occurred over a number of different sessions where we unpick all of those different themes in greater detail. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. That was great. It was very informative. I can see how, that would take much longer in a real world situation. I don't know if anyone has any initial questions kind of off the back of that. I know you need to head off soon, so if anyone does, we can pass them along to you. I'm sure after the fact. But I guess I'll hand over Kate now to you, so kind of pick up and give us a background on the university.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Matt, for that. That was fascinating. So my name is Kate Gadsby-Mace. I am the recruitment manager for North, Central and South America for the University of Sheffield. So I'm going to give you a brief history of a civic university, the University of Sheffield. Also, a very brief history of me. I am an alumni of Sheffield, so I did my undergraduate, my master's and my PhD all at the University of Sheffield. before moving to work for the international recruitment team. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about those experiences. And we do also have a current student with us today. Thank you very much, Laura, for joining us, who is studying politics. So they will also be able to give their experience as well. So I'm going to run through this reasonably quickly so that we have plenty of time for questions at the end. But just to give you a background, so the University of Sheffield is very integrated with the city of Sheffield. It developed from 3 local institutions, that's the Sheffield School of Medicine, Firth College, and the Sheffield Technical School. So when the university asked people of Sheffield for donations in 1904, Sheffield responded, donating over £50,000, which was raised by penny donations from local steel and factory workers and residents. That's the equivalent today to over £15 million. So thanks to the generosity of the people of Sheffield, the university was able to establish a world-class institution, which benefited the local population and their descendants. And the university was given official university status in 1905. We started with 114 students, and now we have around 30,000 students, a quarter of which are international students. So the founding of ourselves as a civic university in cooperation with the local community in the city is hardwired into our DNA and affects everything that we do today. So we're constantly striving to improve the city, the region of Sheffield, the UK, and of course the rest of the world with the research, the teaching that we do. So, for example, one way that we interact a lot with the community is via our students' union. So we do have the #1 students' union in the UK, and that has been voted for by students for the last 6 years. We offer the best facilities and student services support through the students' union. And because the students feel that the SU represents them in the best possible way. So the building itself is a thriving hub of student life with a range of shops, cafes and bars. We have comedy and music events, film nights in our own cinema, theatre performances, club nights, and many other activities to get involved with. We have over 300 student sports clubs and societies that they can get involved with, meaning that they have a rich extracurricular life as well as academic life. There's a very strong support network as well, which is delivered from the Students' Union. We have an advice centre offering guidance on visas and immigration, disability and dyslexia support, finances, housing, mental health counselling, and anything else that students might need help with. And the Students' Union is run by the students for the students, ensuring that they're elected through an election process each year, and then they get to have a say in how the university is run. We also have a job shop, which advertises opportunities for part-time work while students study and supports them if they're looking for jobs on or off campus. And then finally, we also have the award-winning volunteering service. So each year, over 2,000 of our students get involved in volunteering for local charities and organisations, really directly giving back to the city of Sheffield, as well as helping them to build their CVs and network for future job opportunities. So there's a big link between the local community of Sheffield and the Students' Union. Another way that the university gives back and collaborates with the local community is via our Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre. This is a world-leading centre attracting over 100 companies to co-locate with the university in the city region, which has created a great deal of wealth and employment opportunities for the region. So our staff and students in the Faculty of Engineering work very closely with the AMRC, with those 120 industrial partners, including Rolls-Royce, McLaren, Siemens, and BAE. In terms of where the university is located, so for those of you who've not visited Sheffield, our campus is at the heart of the city. So it merges with downtown, And as a result, students have all of the facilities of the city on their doorstep, and they become really integrated into its fabric. So their identity is not just with the university, it's also with the city and its community. Our students live in one of the most desirable and affluent areas of the city, which is on the west side of the city, close to the Peak District National Park, which is one of the UK's most popular centres for hiking, mountain biking and climbing, and part of the reason that Sheffield is known colloquially as the outdoor city. And Sheffield is really a city like no other. I'm obviously biased because I studied here and have lived here for so long, but it is an incredible place to live and study, and hopefully our student will be able to agree with me on that. And that's why so many of our students fall in love with Sheffield, and why we have one of the highest retention rates of students post-graduation who decide to stay to continue studying or to work and live in Sheffield. It's also a very affordable city, partly due to the value that local businesses place on students as customers. So the cost of living here is one of the lowest in the UK. And it was named as the joint third most affordable student city in the UK in 2022. Living costs are around 10% lower than the UK national average and 25% lower than in London and the south of England. Sheffield also has a reputation for being very friendly and safe. It's reported to be the safest large city in the UK. And it's ranked as the greenest city in the UK, with over 60% of our city being green space. There are way more trees than people. And we have over 250 parks, woodlands, and gardens in the city. So those are some of the main reasons that I chose to study here in Sheffield when I had the option. In terms of the kinds of courses that we offer, we have a huge range of courses split over 5 faculties, hundreds of different majors that students can choose from. But we also offer some fairly niche courses that particularly our students from the US are often very interested in. So looking back over the last couple of years, we've had students from the US studying a range of master's courses, including language and communication impairment in children, cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, human osteology and funerary archaeology, philosophy, as well as cognitive neuroscience and human neuroimaging. But they have a wide range of subjects that they can choose from. For example, we had Greg Slade. He was the recipient of the Marshall Scholarship for Sheffield in 2019. And he came to us to study politics. And as part of a larger interview that he gave, he said, you should 100% come to Sheffield and study politics. You're going to be put into this community of incredibly affectionate and supportive faculty and staff members. Your fellow classmates are going to be intelligent and knowledgeable about the subjects that you'll talk about, and you'll be in a city that wants you here and is going to train you for your future. We have also then since received Marshall Scholarship students for 2020, and also we're looking forward to, and for 2023, and we're looking forward to having more in the future. Quickly, in terms of the scholarships that we offer that we have available for postgraduate students, we have 125 scholarships available that are worth 25% of students' tuition fee. And there is a short application required, which is 2 questions. Why do you want to study your course? And what future career do you want to go on to do? And why do you want to study it at the university? And how will the university help you progress into your future goals? And if students are not successful with that scholarship, as long as they accept their offer by a certain date in the middle of June, and they can get up to £2,500 discounted off their course fees. There's no additional scholarship application necessary for this. It's automatic as long as they accept their offer to study with us by that date. In terms of how you can apply, so your students can apply for postgraduate courses direct to the university. All of the details are available on the website, all of the courses, and all of the stages of the application process. but they're also, of course, welcome to contact myself or my team if they have any questions, and we're always available to be able to help and support them. So that is all from me. Hopefully that was helpful for everyone. I'm just going to end this slideshow, and then we will hopefully be able to have a chat to our current student about their experience, and they can hopefully agree with everything that I've said so far. Lord, are you on the call?
Yes, hello, good afternoon.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Would you like to, just sort of talk, if you're comfortable, about your experience, anything in particular that you'd like to say about your experience in Sheffield or in the department?
Yeah, sure. So I first came to Sheffield in 2016, and I came for a summer program, and I fell in love with the city, with its people. I'm Spanish, so I only came here during the summers. And the summer before I got into university at Sheffield, I did a summer program as well at the university summer school for English, and that was the best experience. So I knew that I wanted to do my undergrad here in Sheffield. So I did that, and even along with the pandemic, that obviously wasn't the best for a student life. It was like the best 3 years of my life. And you just get so much experience out of it, and so much companionship as well, I believe. And after that, I decided to do my master's here in Sheffield as well. And now currently I'm doing my master's in international relations. And I did my undergrad in politics and international relations. And currently I'm talking with a few members of the department in order to apply for a PhD here at the department. So I'm basically doing all my academic career here at the department. It truly is. It's not only that the city is very welcoming itself, but the university is as well. I think it's very important to understand that from an international student perspective, because obviously when you're a home student, it's obviously very nerve-wracking, when you go to university for every single person, because new experiences, and it's an uncommon word, something that you haven't met yet. But it's just, I cannot express this enough. It is very, very welcoming. And in talking about the department specifically, they provide so much help in every single matter, from academically, from personal experience, such as mental health or any other issues you might encounter, English barrier or language barrier that you may have, and any other challenges that you may be facing. It's a really great comfort to know that you can actually count on them and be prepared for anything that you may have or you may struggle with. You have them to be there for you. And this one thing that, because usually like people ask me a lot, like, okay, why do you do your master's here as well? Why are you thinking about a PhD? Don't you want to change universities or to change the department? But there's one thing that I will seriously talk about when talking about this department, is the fact that it's very encouraging when talking about how do you want your career to be like, and how do you want to approach your point of view and what you're going to be talking about, and not only in your essays, but in every proposal you may do, every jobs that you may be looking for. They are very, very encouraging in order to know and to make you understand what you want to say, what you want to express to other people. So I would think that is the main reason why I stay there. It's not only, obviously, the encouraging and welcoming part is really important, but I think it's also, like, I was talking about it with a friend a few days ago. He started the undergraduate with me, and he's now doing his master's here in Sheffield as well. And we were talking about how when we first arrived in the department, we were kids and we didn't really know about politics, did we? Or what international relations was, political theory. we had no idea. And right now, 4 years later, and despite all the all the things, all the events that have happened in the world in the last 4 years, which I bet that none of us expected all of this, it has really formed us an opinion, and it has helped us a lot when deciding what to do in our academic careers and how to structure our essays and our views, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. That's an excellent answer. Thank you so much. And I'm really pleased to hear, obviously, that you had such a good experience. And it's always really gratifying when students want to stay on to continue studying at the university, because I feel like that is one of the best sort of recommendations you can have, that students want to stay in the city with the university in their department, and sort of continue their journey with us. So that's amazing to hear. Can you tell us a little bit about what your first impressions of Sheffield were, and how you find the city? Are you working alongside your studies, or are you doing any extracurricular activities with the Students' Union?
Sure. So when I first came, it wasn't the same when I first came as 16-year-old, because I was staying with a host family. So it wasn't the same as when I first came as an undergrad in 2019. At first, obviously, it's intimidating, isn't it? But then the moment that you step up and just start talking with people, and you realize how all of you are actually in the same situation, aren't you? Because you're all new students. So my first impressions of the city was that it was really beautiful to me, for all the green spaces that it has, all the opportunities that you can have, and all the amazing experiences you can have alongside your university experience as well. You met so many new people. You met many parts of the city that you will consider to be hidden in a way, because it has changed so much in the last 4 years. It's been crazy how much it's changed. Sadly, I couldn't really job alongside my degree, because I came to Sheffield in September 2019, and sadly by March 2020 I had to come back to Spain because of COVID. So I couldn't come back to the UK until a year and a half after that, which obviously it wasn't ideal. And right now, though, in my last year, in my third year, and also right now during my master's, I am working alongside students, and that's something that's also been really helpful. And I actually find my job, one of them, I found it through the job shop that on the Students' Union. So that was really helpful at that moment, because obviously, depending on every family economic situation, especially after COVID, we all got a bit hit economically about it. So having that extra help and extra money that you were doing while studying, that was really helpful. And I would say that it can be intimidating, but it becomes a small town in a way. It's not like those really big cities such as Manchester or London or even Leeds. It provides a very small town vibes, I would say. And when you get involved in societies, such as I was doing my undergrad, I took part in the UN Society at the university, and I also was in the tennis society. So that was really helpful as well, especially to make friends, obviously, but also to get more involved in university in a way and get that full university experience, I would say.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I think that Sheffield often feels like the best of both worlds, in that it is a large city. There is a lot of activities going on. We host a lot of events in the city, international music festivals. Yeah. We have the snooker championships. We have sort of different sports activities going on, the rock climbing championships, etc. But also it has a very homey feel, I think. And I've heard it described as feeling like lots of villages sort of stitched together. Yeah. So, the each individual area of Sheffield that you might be living in has its own local feel and its own shops and things, but then you've also got the benefit of being close to the city centre where everything's happening, and then also close to the Peak District, this area of incredible natural beauty, so you can get out, go hiking, enjoy nature.
Yeah, I would say that definitely all the green spaces that it has, the Peak District is an absolute marvel. I come from a city in Spain that's, well, I always live by the beach. So when I first came to the Peaks, I was completely stunned, like I hadn't seen anything like that before. So the university, obviously, it does a lot of activities related to the Peak District. But the good thing about Sheffield is the great amount of green spaces, parks, lakes that it has. Just, I mean, maybe like 5 minutes from the city center, and that's absolutely crazy. But you have so many people there, so many activities to do, and the students' union organizes, and every society, as well as every department, organizes many activities that relate to being outdoorsy, or just sports events, musical festivals, movie festivals as well. And it's just amazing. Like you can't get bored in the city. It will actually have to be really difficult for that.
Yes, I agree. I've been here a while now and I still haven't got bored of it. Does anybody have any questions about the presentation, or any questions for our student ambassador that they'd like to ask? Obviously wants to make sure that the session is as relevant for you as possible. If you want, you're welcome to just sort of pop those into the chat if you have any questions that you want us to answer. In the meantime, just while we're waiting for those to come in, I wonder if you could tell us, Lord, about sort of if you have taken part or sort of used any of the support services that the university offers, like the 301 Study Skills Centre, or the Student Advice Centre, or the International Student Support. Equally, if what sort of support you've got from your department in terms of sort of your study skills, or kind of whether your personal tutor, have they supported you a lot with your activities and things while you've been doing your course?
Sure. Yeah. So during the first year of my undergrad, I had a few sessions with the 301 skills, because coming from a different country, not having done A levels, it was very new. To do how to do an essay, how to do a political essay, how to study politics. It was all very new to me. So I was with them for about a year, and then the following years, including this year as well, I've been going to several meetings, several events that they have done, in order to improve your writing skills, your language skills, how to write a CV or a cover letter. Those have been really, really helpful as well. Regarding support, I haven't received I haven't asked really for any support regarding language skills. However, I have been to student support and international student support as well for mental health reasons. So obviously, it's really easy that during your time at university, you find yourself maybe being extra anxious or stressed or even depressed. And obviously with the pandemic, it all has aggravated those kinds of situations, hasn't it? So that has always been really helpful as well. It was just been a really good experience, and I was very reluctant at first. And a few months ago, the situation personally at home, it didn't go well. So I reached out to the apartment itself and asked for some kind of help when doing my essays, because I realized that my master's wasn't being how I used to do it on my undergrad, that I was struggling, and they gave me a lot of support in terms on how to write correctly on the master's level that I was looking for, how to do a proper research. And that was incredibly helpful. I cannot stress that enough. And I just think that it's really, really important for a university to reach out to you and let you, like, allow you to actually ask for help when you need it. And I know a lot of my classmates as well that have been struggling, and they asked for help doing their undergrad and doing their masters, and they have all received the help that they needed. I've never had a complaint about it ever. And I think that was key actually when deciding where to study and where to continue your education. That's always very necessary, because no one is always all right, and sometimes you need some help. And the fact that you can count with your own department, not only the university itself, which is also very helpful, but obviously they will have a lot of people to take care of and a lot of things to be precise with. But the fact that your own department can give you that help is an enormous help, for sure.
That's excellent. I'm really glad to hear that, Lord, and I'm glad that you knew about those facilities being available, and that you felt comfortable reaching out, and that you received the help and support that you needed, and for your peers as well, because obviously it's very important to us at Sheffield to make sure that all of our students feel supported with their academic work, with their extracurriculars, with their own health and well-being. It's a big priority for us at the university. And so in my experience as a student, and it sounds like yours as well, I was able to reach out to staff at any time. There was almost quite quite an informal relationship with lecturers, where they were very approachable, and I was able to reach out for help and support. And I think that's why we do have such a high sort of success rate at the university in terms of students being able to get good grades, go out into their graduate jobs feeling very prepared.
Definitely.
That's excellent. So thank you so much. If we don't have any questions, if there's nothing else that you want to add, Lord, then we could end the session here. Hayley, I don't know if you have any questions, anything we've not mentioned that you want us to highlight before we go?
No, I think the lack of questions is a reflection on how comprehensive everything was, to be honest. I think you touched on all of the kind of points that people tend to ask questions on. And Lord, thank you so much for sharing your experience as well. It sounds like you've had a great time at Sheffield and might be carrying on there, which is exciting. So yeah, I can't think of anything else. I mean, I don't know, Lord or Kate, if you can kind of touch on maybe the difference in transitioning from an undergrad to a postgraduate degree, and what was kind of required, because especially for the Marshall Scholarship, it would be US students coming to study a postgraduate degree. So maybe that transition between undergrad to postgrad, and how you found that at Sheffield.
Yeah, go ahead, Lord.
Yeah, so the transition, I was really scared of that, because I thought that it was going to be very intimidating and but because I did my undergrad there as well, I felt very, very supported. And it was, I remember the first seminar that I had, that they reassured us, like, if you've done well in your degree, you're going to do perfect here as well. You're going to have extra work, obviously, and it's going to be a bit more difficult than it was your undergrad. But if you have made it here, it's because you can do this and you are perfectly able to do it. And that was just, it's also the role that the mentors and your module leaders play as well. That was very, very important on encouraging you, and also give you the support you need, and any doubts you may have, that you can pass them by. And it was really helpful. But I would think, like, the biggest difference, it might be the things that you're going to be studying compared to your undergrad. Undergrad is usually more generalistic, and when you do a master's, you focus more on a certain field in certain areas. And I would say that was the biggest change for me, the specialization of a topic.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think it can sometimes be intimidating for international students because they're very conscious that a lot of the master's courses are for 1 year. And we do have some available for 2 years, but the majority of the PGT courses are 1 year in the UK, or certainly in England. And so that's a short amount of time to get used to everything, to make those transitions, and to get up to speed and start performing, very well academically. So I think it's always important to stress how much support there is available for students. We do have each student is assigned a personal tutor in their department to provide academic support. Their academics will have sort of a office hour each week where students can go and have one-to-one support with them and answer any questions that they have about the modules and the courses that they're studying. Outside of the department, there's also the 301 Study Skills Centre, which can help if students are concerned about, as Lord mentioned, like academic writing in English, or maths and statistic skills, or public speaking and presentation skills, things like that. And also the way that the modules are assessed is very varied. So it does give students an opportunity to really excel. So if they're particularly good at exams or essays or public speaking, presentations, group work, individual work, all of those things will be available for the students. And so they will always have an opportunity to show their skills in the ways they're most confident and comfortable, and then also have the support to build up those other skills, so that they become really well-rounded, and have all of the abilities that they're going to need to progress out into the world post-graduation. So although it can sound very intense to do a 1-year master's in the UK, coming from the US system, I think that the success that we have with our international students speaks for itself. And if you do ever have any future questions about studying in the UK generally, or specifically at Sheffield, please do get in touch. I think Hayley will probably share around the contact details, and you're always welcome to approach us, and we can have a chat about any specific questions that you have.
Thanks so much, Lord and Kate. That makes sense, that it's a bit more specialized, and that, if there is something that a student's particularly worried about, that there is that support to kind of help guide them through that, which is really helpful. I think that's all from me. Unless anyone has any last minute burning questions, I think that's that. And again, I'll share details with you of people who've said they're happy for that to happen, so you can follow up with everyone afterwards as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you to Matt for his presentation. And thank you so much, Laura, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.